So got it. So that is what I forgot to mention, that this is a recorded webinar, so you can listen back, but also we will post it on the Links website for those who didn't have the opportunity to join us. So that is what we, among many other things, found in the Links project. We related to issues of vulnerability, societal resilience, diversity among the population in local communities and neighborhoods, for example, that are affected by the crisis or that are living in a hazardous environment. So many things as an outcome of the project. We realized that we are not running an isolated project. So we are really part of a community or let's say a group of really knowledgeable scholars who are addressing these kind of topics already for quite some time. And that is also why we really would like to be engaged in the let's say, disaster and crisis management community, being in discussion really with knowledgeable colleagues. And hence also for today, we are happy that two really knowledgeable colleagues in our field will join us for a discussion, and we will really try to pick their brains to be inspired. And also to see, hey, how can we jointly understand the issues that we are talking about, working towards improved ways to use social media and crowdsourcing. So the first speaker for today is Professor Christian Reuter. He's from the University of Darmstadt in Germany. From the Department of Computer Science, and he has a chair in Science and Technology for Peace and Securities, and already for quite some years he is addressing the questions: how can we understand social media at times of crisis, and also trying to understand how response organizations, practitioners can actually use that social media. And then Professor Amanda Hughes from the US, from the Brigham Young University in Utah. A fairly early morning for you, Amanda, but welcome to our webinar, of the School of Technology, with a chair in computer science, information technology, but also the director of the Crisis Informatic Labs. We are very curious also to learn from your experience in that lab. So welcome to you all. Feel free to cast your question in the chat box. Among others, Nathan Clark, the scientific coordinator of the Links project, will be there to pick up your questions, but also John Hall of CMIND, the CMIND platform network of crisis and disaster resilience in Europe, will be there. So your questions will be taken care of. As the design, sort of the setup of this webinar is as follows. Before the webinar, we sent a couple of questions to Christian and Amanda for them to prepare themselves. And I will read the questions for them, for you all to understand what we are actually are going to discuss. And then they have some 5 or so minutes for each question. And there will be 4 questions in total. There will be also more general questions, but then we also can pick some of the questions that you put in the chat to see how we can further engage in the discussion. So Christian, if I may, for you, the first question, and I will read it, but we sent it before, but so that everyone is aware of the kind of question. So you have been working on these kind of topics for quite some time now. So what have you seen in terms of the dynamics of the social media usage? How does that evolve over time? And what, according to your knowledge and experience in your research, what are the significant challenges faced by the authorities and the citizens trying to use the social media communication, maybe through online platforms?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for the question and thanks for inviting us that we can be here and participate in this webinar. First thing is the change of social media dynamics during crisis. So social media has come a long way, right? It's not just for cat videos or memes anymore, and it's really important tool when it comes to emergency or crisis situations. And this is not just the case for a few years now, but we can also find first use of social media during emergencies already after 9/11, when wikis have been used to collect information about people who are missing, and then during further emergencies during that decade, people used photo and photo repository sites, for instance, to exchange information after, for instance, Hurricane Katrina in 2005. People used People Finder or Shelter Finder to find each other. And all of these different studies have shown that social media has become a really important way for people to communicate during a disaster event. So nothing new, but something that evolved during the last years. And in the recent years already, also during the 2010s or 2020s, there have been a lot of study who looked on how social media is used in these different events. And it's interestingly, we are seeing that the way that people use social media during emergencies can be also different depending on what country they live in. Actually, as part of a PhD thesis I defended last year, in which Kees acted as a co-supervisor, we conducted a survey of 7,000 people in Europe, in countries like Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and the United Kingdom. And we found out that there are pretty big differences sometimes in how people use these different tools during emergencies. For instance, we see that or saw that people in Germany were more state-oriented, relying on the state, depending on instructions from the state, while people, for instance, in the Netherlands were more individualistic, willing to prepare themselves, and preparing themselves has a more important value. I also think that during the last years of Corona, much of these things have changed because people were all instructed to prepare themselves and to participate in this, but we saw them differences. However, besides differences, I think that the people face same challenges. For instance, we can differentiate between challenges faced by authorities and then maybe other challenges faced by citizens. We see that authorities face the challenge of organizational support, or that they have no training on using social media in sufficient time and resources. So this is maybe the first challenge. The second challenge for authorities is then more related to the information itself. So challenges of information extraction, information processing, verification, the liability of information, the credibility, and also information overload coming in when too much information is provided. A third challenge is maybe the inclusion of the work of digital volunteers into formal response work, which may help, but which may also make it more complicated to coordinate the situation. Fourth thing is that citizens use diverse apps and social media related platforms, which can lead to also incomplete feedback loops, unclear prioritization, or communication overload. I mentioned just the challenges of emergency responders or authorities, but there are also some challenges that citizens face. For instance, they sometimes lack the knowledge and guidance on how to use social media. So what is valuable and what is not valuable. Sometimes they have been trained, but also during a situation, instructions can help them to maybe do the things which are important or good. Also, information overload is the same issue there. Then there are also concerns about security or personal data protections. What should they share? Should they share? I'm very vulnerable and I need help, but others may use it in another way which is not intended. And also the accessibility for older generations or disabled people is something that might be seen as a challenge. And the challenge for both sides, so for citizens and authorities, is I think that, there might be malicious behavior, unreliable information, in general, false information, misinformation, false rumors, and also the chaotic information display. So much research has emerged during the last years, but still there are some challenges if we see how social media is used in practice.
Thank you, Christian. Already a good overview, sort of the main challenges that we are facing, and we academics and practitioners alike, split in first responders, citizen groups, and also what challenges they face, sort of together in the interaction. So we will come back to this later on. Amanda, also for you a question to start off. You are the director of the Crisis Informatics Lab. You also, by the way, a renowned member of the ISCRAM community, Information Systems for Crisis Management and Response. What, according to you, what are the activities you are currently involved in addressing the issues that Christian just raised, but also what do you see in terms of opportunities to bridge the gap between the authorities and the citizens?
Yes, thank you, and thanks also for inviting me. I'm really excited to be here and to talk about this topic because it's so near and dear to everything I've been doing for so long. So Christian gave a great overview of like all the challenges. So I'm sure we'll probably be repeating each other a little bit here and there. But so I wanted to talk maybe about some of the projects that I've been working on that specifically kind of try to bridge the gap as much as we can between authorities and citizens. And so some of the projects that I've been involved with over the years and I'm currently working on is just that whole challenge of how do we help emergency managers actually be able to make sense of all the data that is out there. And I think that is still an ongoing challenge. We have not solved that. I think we solved it in little ways and little content in particular contexts sometimes, but not as a general rule. So some of the things I've been working on is trying to parse down the load of social media down to particular audiences that are more important or more interesting for emergency managers. So done some work looking at local people, local individuals that are directly affected by, like a wildfire or flooding. And there's been research over time that's kind of shown that those tend to be people that are saying more interesting things, more valuable things that can contribute to situational awareness or just awareness about how citizens are responding, which I think is still kind of a gap. I think we tend to focus a lot on situational awareness, like actionable kind of, we're going to go out and fight this fire because somebody said something. But there's also kind of this need to just understand how people are receiving information and whether they understand it. How are they reacting to it? Are they panicking? Like what kind of messaging can we then share to counteract that? And so some of the work I've been doing is trying to understand what are the needs of people. In the United States, we call them public information officers. I know everywhere has somebody that's like the public relations side of an emergency response, where their job is to make sure that everybody's getting the information that they need and that they're understanding how the citizens are reacting. And so I've focused a lot on that particular kind of role because it's kind of where social media meets the emergency management group, although it can come in different ways with the situational awareness as well. So I've also been involved in some really kind of fun projects where I think everyone's probably pretty aware that there's a lot of machine learning in this space, trying to, if you have tons and tons of social media data, how can we use machine learning to condense that information down into manageable levels, because we can't, as humans, monitor millions of messages at a time and extract the useful information out of there. So I've been involved in some projects where we've been trying to extract down to more usable information. One effort that I've really enjoyed working with, and I've worked with many people on here might know Steve Peterson, he's an emergency responder that's very active in this community, that we're trying to understand how can we use volunteer groups that are already trained in disaster to be able to help us label messages for machine learning, so that we can get better, so our machine learning models can learn quickly and more efficiently, and that they can be trained on data that is specific to the particular disaster that's happening, by people that are local and that understand, all the landmarks that are associated with that area, and the things, the important people, important places, which is something that you don't always get from using kind of generic crowdsourcing systems like Amazon Turk or something, where they aren't necessarily local and don't necessarily have that information that can help. And so we've done some work on that during COVID, where we were labeling messages and having, we have these called CERT teams, Citizen Emergency Response Teams. We were training them to be able to label messages quickly so that we could get more effective information out of that. And we like that approach because we love using the citizens and volunteers and helping them get involved in the work. And then I've also just been doing some work in flooding and trying to understand how people make sense of all the data that is out there. So this is one of the things that I've noticed in recent years, is it's not just social media data. We've had explosions in other types of data, sensor data, as well as there's been huge leaps in what people can do with modeling, like flood modeling. And so then people want to incorporate social media, but then there's just all this data and trying to get it into useful and meaningful information that people can actually use. And that goes for emergency managers, but also for citizens. There's a fair amount of work going on right now of during a flood, for example, how do citizens make sense of flood models? Because usually they're built for a very technical audience, and how can you help them understand that? How can you help them understand whether they need to evacuate? And so that's part of that is social media, but I've kind of seen in recent years that it's not just social media, it's all the different kinds of data in different ways, and how can we bring in data in useful and meaningful ways. Social media definitely, though, I think still has that potential to be able to get at some of the citizen data that we can't get with sensor data and some of the more traditional ways of collecting data in emergency management. So yeah, I think that was what I had planned for that question. So
yeah, no, thank you so much, and really interesting projects you are heading and are involved in. In particular, I like the may I call it the citizen science approach, right? That citizens also provide so data for the machine learning, and also that's really interesting. What you mentioned in yours and also in Christian's sort of answer, it's really interesting to address the question. So what about the interaction between the citizens and the formal authorities? And you addressed that in many ways, referring to different technologies. But in all of the use of all of those technologies, I guess one thing that pops up from your and also Christian's story is trust, really. And trust in one another, but also trust in the data. So at least that is one challenge that came out of your answers, and hence also the next question to Christian that we also prepared before, but now it becomes all the more relevant, is okay, in your experience, having yourself worked with different with scholars of different disciplines, but also with practitioners, maybe even with citizens, what is your idea about building trust and connection between the different involved actor groups, and then citizens in particular? So what is your view on that trust building that is so needed in this regard?
Yeah, thanks also for this question. Actually, the written question for me sounded a bit more that I was asked for novel approaches that might help to connect citizens and to build trust.
Exactly.
Which though I may start with this, and while researching for novel approaches, anyway, I knew some of them. I also found that on the Links Community Center website, there is a list of different disaster community technologies, and also in different studies I found them. First of all, some years ago, we elaborated a so-called crisis communication matrix, which distinguished between different use cases we can consider. For instance, inter-organizational exchange of information among authorities. I will not focus on it today. And self-organization of citizens, I will also not focus on this today. But there are also two other use cases which include the exchange between authorities and citizens. So like the crisis communications of authorities to citizen, or the other way around, how can citizen-generated content be included in emergency? So the first category of tools, they try to enhance the situational awareness and the decision-making of authorities by integrating citizen-generated content like photos, like videos, like situational updates. And these tools are outside crisis often summarized under the category of social media analytics or social media intelligence tools. And there are some examples like scatter blocks, for instance, which is used by authorities and also by virtual operation support teams. And you can search for specific keywords, you can monitor specific crisis events, you can conduct textual analysis and visualize the results of your queries as well. And there are other tools like AIDR, which uses artificial intelligence to classify social media content into different categories, for instance, such as infrastructure damage or missing people or donation or volunteers or irrelevant information, which is also an important category because you do not have to consider this. And in this way, authorities can focus on the most relevant information occurring or depending on the state of the emergency. And while AIDR is limited to Twitter, there are also other commercial tools like Public Sonar, which seek to provide additional features for monitoring, analysis, and reporting. Because I think this is also a question that has already been emerged. The percentage of tools that are used actually changes over time always, and crisis management has to adapt to this. The second category is maybe tools for crisis communication from authorities to citizens, like advice for emergency prevention or sharing information. And outside crisis, they are often summarized under the term social media management tools. And a rather popular tool for social media management is TweetTech because it's free and it allows for both the monitoring of keywords and the posting of messages. However, it's just limited to Twitter, and it does not focus on the interaction with the wider landscape of social media platforms. Another example or other commercial tools are Hootsuite and Sprout Social, and they provide more advanced features for monitoring, analysis, and communication. And now I come back to the issues of trust building and connection with citizens, which was also part of the question. First, a strategy is information dissemination when information is just provided and then people do something with it. A second strategy is the data monitoring and analysis. So it's just the other way around. But a third strategy is direct conversation and coordination among citizens and authorities, which also allows bi-directional communication and response to individual requests, and such allows for better connectivity and trust building among authorities and citizens. But of course, it costs time and effort, and you need to have the workforce for it, which do not need to be on site. Therefore, virtual operations teams can also help to make this third, or to support the third part, which is, I think, very important.
All right. Yeah. No, thank you. So just a brief follow-up question. So in the questions, we also refer to different phases. I guess different phases of the disaster management cycle, so to say. So the direct response, but also mitigation, but then also preparation and prevention and all that. So listening to you, do you see also I don't know, a need for different approaches in the different disaster phases of the different phases in the disaster cycle?
Yes, I think it always depends on if what people need during that situation. During the first phase, for instance, just the information dissemination is very important, that everyone knows what is going on and what he should do, or she. And then later on, bi-directional communication, when people are doing more different things instead of just running away, for instance, is, I think, more important. So communication professionals need to decide this then a bit. Right.
Yeah. No, thanks. And a question for you, Amanda. So in the introduction, I referred to the challenge of practitioner organizations, first response organizations, that not always the organizational routines are suitable for really taking the social media data into their data sources, but even also a challenge to act upon them. So to your knowledge, what have you seen in terms of organizational adaptation in their communication strategies in relation to the new sources that you are referring to, not just social media, but also sensors and machine learning and all that? Are the organizations ready for it?
Thanks. So I always find this really interesting to reflect on, because for my PhD, which I finished more than 10 years ago, one of the very first things I did was an interview study with a bunch of public information officers. And social media was this was probably like 2009-ish, I think. Mm-hmm. And it was like, how have you been using social media? And many of them were like, we haven't been. We'd like to, but we have no idea how to do this. Mm-hmm. Our managers don't even let us use social media. They block it on our websites and things like that. And so it was really interesting just from the start. As much as social media could be useful, there's all these kind of organizational social barriers to incorporating it into an emergency management organization. And I'm still surprised that a lot of those things still exist. Mm-hmm. Maybe not as much for sure. I mean, I think there seems to be kind of a dare I say, universal recognition that social media could be useful, as opposed to it's not useful, I'm not even going to look at it. But I think I still see a lot of barriers to using social media, especially in we have a lot of rural organizations, rural communities where they have mm-hmm. one emergency manager and they have to do all the different emergency management roles. So they don't necessarily have the technical expertise or the time to do all the social media monitoring. And so it doesn't happen. I generally find that large metropolitan areas generally have a team that does social media monitoring, and they usually have a pretty good system set in place. They're usually using more active in their engagement. You know, there's kind of different levels of engagement. I think from an emergency management side, I think kind of like the bare minimum is just we actually have social media and we show, you know, we respond and occasionally post something. But then there's other people that will actually try to engage with the community and try to like kind of, you know, have different campaigns where they try to, you know, make people like here in Utah, we are in danger of earthquakes. So we have like this yearly campaign where they try to get everybody like aware of like what could happen during an earthquake. And so kind of these engagement campaigns to get people listening and to know that when something does happen that they can come to that source for information. But then you also have people that are actually trying to talk to the community. And then I'd say another level above that is emergency managers that are able to monitor the data that isn't like directed at them, that is about whatever event that they're trying to respond to. And that's going to usually require tools like some of the tools that Christian was just talking about. Usually involves a little bit of money because you have to have money to make those tools work. So I think people have, I have seen a lot more activity around engagement and emergency managers really getting involved during large scale events, but it really depends on who is your emergency manager, who's your emergency manager that's monitoring social media, how active are they, how involved are they? Sometimes, you know, people ebb and flow in how involved they want to be in that type of process. And so you get different experiences from different types of organizations. And I think there's still a little bit of that mentality of not wanting to share everything that's going on. And because if you share things and then, you know, bad things happen, you could get in trouble, you could get sued, you could get So I think there's still a little bit of that happens as well. So yeah, I think it's still really fascinating. I think organizations are definitely using social media more and incorporating it into like monitoring, listening, and engagement. But I, you know, it's still a long ways, I think, before it's a universal thing. But
yeah. No, thank you. And I can actually recall what we have found in links as well, right? So a lot of, let's say, there is hesitation, but there are also really interesting solutions and creative people willing to improvise if needed. Then what we also found and discussed with our practitioners is that, hey, those are sometimes local solutions, right? Okay, can we sort of scale up from those local solutions to a higher level, maybe in the safety region or on a broader administrative body, or can we learn across different organizations and so forth? So Christian, referring to in your first answer, you referred to your thesis in which you address the cultural context, right? So we are talking about different social and cultural contexts in which at the local level solutions are found. What do you think? What can we learn from those really local solutions? And I don't know, implement some of the lessons learned in another context. Since you addressed that cultural issues, that cultural issue, I'm curious listening to you.
Yeah, interesting question. I think that, of course, we can learn from other cases, and things that worked well in one situation or one crisis might work well in another one, but it also might be the case that it's not working because the culture is different and people expect something very different based on their national culture, but also maybe based on who is involved, what age group, what professional group is involved. Therefore, I'm I'm sure that individual use cases and seeing what is working helps other cases, but not necessarily and not for every case, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What's your reflection on that, Amanda?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, a lot of my work is US based, but even in the US, like just the shift away from different platforms to other platforms, and then kind of the big elephant in the room is like, what's going to happen with Twitter? Because we've all like relied really heavily on Twitter because it's kind of this nice free source of data that's open and public, and we don't know how long that's if it's going to remain or going to remain as the source of information that it was in the past, just based on, you know, being bought by a different company and being and some of the decisions they make. And so I think it makes you realize that all these choices, it's really hard to build a strategy around one platform because things change very quickly. And I've also found it really interesting. I've been involved with kind of loosely some work in different countries, like very different countries than like China, where they have a very different, where they have their own social media, but it's very mandated, like and monitored by the state, which is a very different approach to other types of countries where it's more, you know, the company that mandates like what can be posted there and what can be shared. And so in countries like that, it's a very different type of model for using social media. And I think we still need a lot of research in different contexts to really understand those differences.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that is also some questions that I read in the chat that are addressing that issue. Okay, should we? Where's the information that works to? Oh no, where's the sort of research or good practices that works towards a form of formalization or standardization? Should we look at that at all, or is it hey, there are local solutions to problems we all recognize, but we should focus on that localization? And I don't know what's your thought on that? Maybe also Christian.
Amanda has already her mic on, so maybe she was about to start.
Well, I mean, that's a hard problem. I mean, mainly because these platforms are not public good services, right? Like they're not. They're run by companies that want to make money. And so we often don't have a lot of control over that. At least I certainly don't as a researcher, that's for sure. And then I think, again, you have that problem of like different countries use different platforms. Like WhatsApp is not very big in the US, but it's huge in like Latin American companies or countries. And so it's hard to say, like, and each of them kind of operate slightly differently. So standardizing it, I feel like it's above my pay grade to do something like that. But I mean, it'd be interesting to think about, though.
Yeah, I think it also depends on what services the state provides. For instance, if everyone in a country needs to have an emergency app and is informed, or everyone who's locked in a specific cell, for instance, is informed about the situation, then social media does not have to have this function. For instance, in Germany, it is still not available that everyone who's locked in a cell is informed, while in the Netherlands, this is already the case for many years already. And I think therefore standardization is good if we learn from others, but we also have very specific situations and contexts that need to be considered.
Yeah, no, thanks. Christian, for you, another question about you raised the issue of privacy as one of the challenges, right? And since you're also working in that field of let's say peace and security, I mean, some, let's say, inhabitants or those who are escaping from violence, for example, they want to stay under the radar, while at the same time they want to inform themselves about safe routes, for example. Or so to your knowledge, how can we deal with the issues of privacy and data security in really using social media for these purposes?
Yeah, interesting question. So first of all, we during the large survey we already talked about, we also asked these 7,000 people about the main barriers, and data privacy issues have been raised by 48%, most common by people in Germany with 62% and around 40 something in the other countries. So data privacy is an issue, and for most of these people it's not an important issue because they have nothing to hide or something like that. But you are talking about a specific group which wants to inform themselves. We also conducted studies, for instance, of how refugees use social medias during their flight. And of course, they have specific strategies, like they delete everything immediately. They have accounts which cannot be directly linked. Much is hidden, but it often depends on what on your threat model. So are you trying to hide information from people who are catching you and your smartphone, and you should not be or it should not be transparent that you have been communicating with some people or that you have posted messages? Or is it the case that platform providers are used by some regimes to collect information on from what IP and what device information has been sent, and therefore they can catch you also you are posting under a fake account? So I think it's very important, and one solution is, of course, if these information are not given out, so if no one has access to it or it's technically not possible. However, on the other side, we know that if everything is totally anonymous and no one can ever find the sources, then also criminal activities might be supported by this, like we also see in the darknet. Good sides that communication and information exchange is free, but the bad side that weapons are handled, for instance.
Yeah. So Amanda, in your projects and also in your lab, how do you deal with privacy and data protection and these kind of issues?
No, I've thought a lot about this because this is something I've also noticed is this is just a general big issue for social media in general. And so it's actually been interesting to see it from kind of the start of social media when everything was like wide open and, you know, they were just kind of sharing all kinds of information and you didn't know how they were using it. And then people kind of realizing that, oh, maybe that's not a great idea. And so I've heard a lot of emergency managers just complain that while it becomes more obviously better for people's privacy and kind of ethical issues for these services to be more locked down, so like Facebook, how you can't collect data from Facebook like you used to be able to, which is probably a good thing, but it makes it very challenging for emergency managers to understand, like, if there's something interesting going on there, like they can't have access to it because it's behind kind of this wall of privacy. And so it's this duality that you always have with privacy. It's like by making things more secure and more private, you lose like that being able to share information more freely. And I think that's something that we've kind of struggled with a bit with social media, is that, like, I think it was more useful when it was more open. And now it's a little harder to get access to the right types of channels. And so I think it's moving more towards creating kind of platforms that work at a community level where people buy into, I want to be part of this community and I'll share my information in this community. There's a couple of platforms in the US that do this, and but then it's that whole issue of getting everybody to buy in. it's challenging. And I think what comes down to is that emergency managers can't just rely on social media to reach their public. Like they have to use all these different type of channels because not everybody buys into a particular platform. And so it also makes the emergency manager job so much harder because they're like, well, I have to use the traditional media that I've always used, and then I got to use all these social media things because they reach a different audience, and then, you know, and other types of like alert systems and things like that. So I think I don't envy them in all the challenging, you know, communication ones they have to come up with, because it's just, it's not a matter of just having one place where they can communicate anymore. They got to communicate across all those things to try to reach as many people as possible.
Yeah. No, yeah, thank you for sharing that insight. I mean, what I really like also in your approach is your sense-making approach, right? So, and that really requires a lot of not just reflection, but also in the action to see, hey, what is the meaning of the data, and also in relation to other data sources. So a form of triangulation, I guess, that is needed. You also refer to machine learning, and also some new sort of developments like early warning systems and what have you. Is that indeed something, is that of a new generation of digital humanitarians? Have to deal with chat GPT or, you know, AI and all that? So is that something new, or is that a continuation of the same sort of challenges to your knowledge, Amanda?
That's a good question. I mean, I think when it comes down to it, I feel like everything is just kind of a repeat of previous challenges, but, you know, just slightly in a slightly different flavor. Like even just like the whole chat GPT has just kind of exploded because, you know, like these models have actually, large language models have actually been around for quite some time. It's just that making it into this accessible package that anybody can get on and use is just like blown everything up because it's access. Like, and I think that's what happened with social media too, is that you had this large kind of untapped potential of people that they're communicating. It's just they were communicating in like face-to-face and kind of local things, but then all of a sudden you could actually see it online, and that just kind of brought in a new, you know, explosion of different types of things. So I don't know. It just presents different opportunities. I don't know that I know what the future brings, but
yeah,
I'm excited. I'm excited to see how people will use some of the kind of chat GPT, large language model things in emergency management, because I think there's some interesting uses there.
Yeah. Like in education, right? So that's trying to find out what it means for our educational systems and all. Christian, maybe a last question to you. You touched upon the challenge that both the first responders or the authorities and the citizens face. That is, maybe it's related to the discussion that we are having right now about false news, fake news, all that. Will that an increasing concern in the future, and a constraint really on the use of social media? What's your take on that?
I think it's a really important question. Of course, if authorities publish information, they do it under their own accounts. Then it's of course good if you can trust these accounts, maybe because they are verified or something like that. But all the information which is provided by citizen, is part of the conversation, and you cannot be sure who is a real person or who is not a real person. If there are trolls that are just capturing the situation and want to spread not just rumors but also uncertainty of or on the ability if emergency services are able to deal with the situation. And I think that it is a real important thing, more important than in the past, because I think we see more tendencies of also information warfare, that other regimes, for instance, are actively aiming at this, and not just in a highly political situation, but also in a normal disaster, just to show how unreliable or incompetent the emergency services or the state is, to put it like that.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So yeah, many challenges, but and then the opportunities ahead. But yeah, and another project I'm involved in, there's our colleagues from the Open University in the UK working on fact checking sort of tools, right? So let the users decide themselves, but you provide, you know, the facts to them through those fact-checking machines. So yeah, there is sort of an ongoing dynamic here that is yeah, tapping into the concerns that you are mentioning, Christian. So I'm looking at the chat box, and also to Nathan. I don't think there are. Nathan, do you have any?
Hello. Yes. I don't think that there's too much that hasn't been covered already in the conversation today. I think they've more or less addressed what was also going through the chat.
Yeah.
So there's 3 minutes. Of course, if somebody has a last question, you can post something. But otherwise, I think we can wrap up here shortly. Thanks a lot, Amanda and Christian, by the way, from my side.
Yeah. No, thank you. Yeah, thank you. I can recall what Nathan just said. So very useful insights. Yeah, it will be really great to keep in touch with you, because you know the Links project will run until at least the end of this year, maybe with a short extension. But what we are in the phase of the Links project really to harvest on the case studies that we did, looking for concrete impact, and see how we can work together with the local practitioners, how they can integrate the results, really looking for concrete societal impact. And also Links, the project will contribute to a new European Horizon project called Synergies, in which we further will work on questions of disaster resilient Europe, using some of the Links outcomes as an input for that new project. Your insights about, you know, the use of social media in the different phases of crisis management and response, in relation to the challenges, so about training and skills, including digital volunteers, working with local communities, trust building, the importance of sense making, all have been very useful insights for us that we can build upon. And there will be more webinars for you, Christian and Amanda. Also, you're of course very welcome to join us in those events. But let's stay in touch. And for the audience, I would say keep an eye on the social media posts of Links on LinkedIn and Twitter, but also on our post on our website, in which we will announce upcoming webinars. So for now, again, Christian and Amanda, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and insight to us, and all for listening in, and hope you will join us next time.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you so much. I look forward to seeing the end results of the Links project and the other project you mentioned. Sounds really interesting.
Keep you in posted, definitely.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. And have a nice day, Amanda.
Thanks.